Hello, this is a Pacesetter training video where we're going to talk a little bit about how to deal with heavy structural loss claims and potential total loss claims. So we're not going to go do a seriously deep dive on this. We're just going to hit some basic ideas and concepts and philosophies so that you can kind of keep in mind to be a little bit more comfortable with doing these types of losses. If you're relatively new to adjusting, every adjuster has to go through this. When you first come and drive up to your first heavy structural loss, it's going to be potentially a little bit disconcerting. And you may be a little bit nervous about how to scope this, how to inspect it, how to photograph it, how to write it, what could be covered and not. There's a lot of different factors that may be involved. And if you're new to adjusting and maybe don't have a lot of experience, this can be a little bit daunting. What this video is going to try to help those adjusters do, and maybe if you're more seasoned, it might teach you a few things or give you a few insights and help you as well or refresh you. But certainly on adjusters that may not have the level of experience that our more experienced adjusters have, this might help ease your mind a little bit and help you understand a little bit about how not to be so afraid of doing structural losses. It's really not that big of a deal. So before we begin, a concept I want to bring up is if you're dealing with any type of loss, we're dealing with damage that's caused by some type of a peril, usually, hopefully a covered peril that we can write, covered under the policy. But something gets damaged. It could be minor damage from wind or hail, could be a tree limb that fell, it could be a fire, a water loss, but you're dealing with some type of damage. So what you need to keep in mind is what we do as adjusters and the many hats that we wear, we're identifying damage. And sometimes it's not a whole lot of damage. Maybe we can pay for it. Maybe it's under the deductible. Maybe it's a little bit over the deductible, but it's damage. If we can pay for it, it's covered under the policy, great. What you want to understand is we're putting Humpty Dumpty back together again, basically, is you have to have some construction knowledge. If you don't have that, I highly recommend you do some training on that. Get on the web. The internet has a ton of free information that you can go look at construction methods of how houses are framed, of how plumbing works, of how air conditioning and HVAC systems work. There's all kinds of free information to get some general knowledge. You don't have to be an expert at any particular trade on a house or a property. However, it would be highly advantageous for you to be knowledgeable on everything. Why? Because you're going to meet a lot of different types of contractors out there that specialize in different areas, maybe, including GCs, general contractors. However, you are an adjuster. You have to be knowledgeable enough and trained to identify and look at and measure and have an understanding of repair methodologies and whether we have coverage or not and how to write any kind of damage. You're the adjuster. It doesn't matter what's damaged on that property. You have to have some knowledge of how to scope that, how to document it, whether we can cover it or not, how to measure it, identifying what the materials are and what the repair methodologies may be in order to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, to put the insured back whole again before the loss occurred. So I highly recommend you continue your training. It's an ongoing knowledge base over years. Keep adding to that. And the more you learn, the better you're going to be in the field and writing your estimates, and the better adjuster you're going to be. So just keep in mind that no matter how much damage there is, a little bit of damage or a total loss, we're basically putting Humpty Dumpty back together. We're piecing all the pieces back together like a puzzle. So yes, more damage, heavy structural losses means that you are going to be taking longer at the inspection. Your risk inspections are going to be longer. Of course they are. Your estimates are going to be bigger. They're going to take longer. They're going to be more detailed. They're going to be more complicated. There's going to be a lot more photos that you're putting in the software. You're going to be labeling those, ordering them. You're going to be writing a lot more line items. There's a lot more details you're going to have to deal with. But the process is basically the same. No matter what you're doing, you're still scoping properties. You're still measuring things, taking photos out in the field, writing notes, getting any documentation from the insured, meeting with contractors, and you're taking all that information and going back to your computer and inputting that into some type of estimating software and creating a file with your estimates and photos and sketches and documents that you're attaching, and you're uploading that to the IA firm, Pacesetter in this case, and then the carrier eventually for payment to the insured. So the process is basically the same. It's just scaled. It's different scales of the same process. So I want you to understand in the beginning, to kind of ease your mind a little bit, heavy structural losses are really no different than any other type of loss. It's just more of it. It's just more stuff you got to deal with. It's the same stuff. It's just more. That's it. So let's look at some of these and determine when we might have a total loss, and the carrier is going to help dictate how they want you to handle total losses. They may say, let's say you have a hurricane you're working or a tornado, and the carrier has a meeting and they say, okay, if you call the insured and they say on the phone their house is completely gone, then the carrier may say, we don't want you to go out and inspect the property. We want you to contact your manager. They will get with us and we will pull that claim and we will give that to our large loss team. That may be one scenario. They may want you to go scope it. They may want you to go out and take photographs, and maybe it's just the perimeter slab that's left. Maybe they just want you to measure that, take some photos. It depends. Get with your manager. They're going to have information on how they want you to handle total losses if you're running any types of storms that may potentially have these types of losses. That is going to be generally Cat 3 at least or above hurricanes, or tornadoes, probably EF4 or EF3 and above, I would think, on potentially this on tornadoes. Again, your manager will help you on this kind of stuff. This, obviously, let's look at this. I think this is pretty obvious that this would be a total loss. You're not going to build this house back. It's completely destroyed. Easy, easy call on this one. Same here. This is why I pulled these pictures in, to help you kind of get an idea. We don't need to scope this to rebuild this. This is a complete loss. There's really no question on this. It's got heavy structural damage, probably foundation damage. The framing throughout the house is damaged from the ground all the way to the ridge caps. This is a total loss, no brainer. Now, what about this? This is different. This is quite different. This looks like a hurricane damage, wind damage, maybe tornado. Potentially straight line winds. Be pretty high straight line winds, probably over 100 miles an hour, but yeah, potentially. This is probably not a structural loss. I'm sorry, a total loss. This can be repaired, obviously. It's pretty heavy damage, and this would be considered a heavy structural loss damage, or at least structural loss for sure. But I wouldn't consider this a total loss. The house is still intact. The major framing looks like it's still intact. The foundation's intact, probably. We have some framing damage in the roof. That's obvious. We could have some racking, wind racking in the frame. There might need to be a structural engineer that would need to come out to look at this. They could call it a total loss, but in the field as an adjuster, if I was going out, I wouldn't call this a total loss on my initial inspection. If the contractor and the insured and the carrier wanted to powwow about getting a structural engineer, and if they were bringing that up to me as the adjuster in the field, I certainly would pass that information on to my management and carrier, and the carrier would make a decision, probably the desk adjuster, of whether they wanted to get a structural engineer involved. But that would be after you were done with your initial inspection, and that would be down the road. You probably would not be dealing with that, but you certainly would want to bring that up to your manager and the DA, and especially if the insured or the contractor was bringing that up and was concerned about that. But you would go ahead and write everything here that you could scope and measure and identify. And you would write all this. You would write all this roofing, the framing, the siding, window damage, this porch, all this framing, gutters, paint, anything inside. Water probably got inside the house. You're going to have water all in the drywall, obviously down in the roofing, in the carpets, the flooring. There's going to be some significant damage to this. The way you scope this is, like we just talked about, slow and steady. It's just more of what you're already doing. You're going to, if you were running this storm, you would have all kinds of wind damage of various levels. You may go to the next house after this one, and they only have a few shingles blown off the roof, and that's the only damage on the property. Maybe it was further away from the tornado or something, or shielded by trees, or who knows. Then, there's something like this that is more severe. It's the same type of stuff. It's just varying degrees of damage and varying materials that are damaged, and how you're going to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and put the house back together again. So yes, this scope is going to take you longer. You're going to be here a while, walking, measuring all this, photographing all this, going inside the house. Make sure it's safe. You probably don't want to get on the roof. Now, the front side could still be in good shape. I've been on many of these before where I've gotten on these roofs. I might even walk down this a little bit if it felt safe. I would make those assessments. It's still got sheathing on it. The rafters are in shape. Certainly, I would be very careful and not access anything over here. Again, I'm not telling you to access these types of roofs. You would have to make those assessments. Safety is the #1 priority. You probably wouldn't have to even get up on these. But if you felt you wanted to get some more information and get closer photographs, you certainly could consider doing that. But be very careful. Safety, again, safety is #1 priority. We don't want you hurt out there in any way. So just keep that in mind, that it is the same type of damages, just more of it. So it's going to take longer. You're going to be a little more methodical about going around and documenting all this, photographing everything, measuring everything. If you're going to probably be a good idea on this type of loss to maybe incorporate hover or eagle view or something that's going to give you more measurements, that you don't have to spend a lot of time out here measuring things. You're certainly going to have to document everything and write everything down that you're going to replace. But be methodical about it. Take time. This is a pretty catastrophic loss here. Probably not a total loss, at least on your end of the claim. It could be determined later again that it might be a structural loss to the degree through an engineer that comes out that they might recommend a total loss. Again, that's probably not going to be in your wheelhouse on this type of loss here. So let's look at another one. Probably the similar situation here. This is probably not a total loss. There's most of the structure still intact. We've got some heavy structural loss here, just like the other one. This is a tree impact, wind claim. But as you can see, a lot of the brick's still intact. Windows look good. Framing is still pretty good. We have other sections of the house that weren't impacted. They may have some damage, but it looks like this is probably still structurally sound. You are going to write everything that you can write, that you can see inside and out. When you get in these types of losses, as in this other one, the previous picture, if you feel safe and you can get inside the house, it's a good idea, obviously, to have a hard hat when you're doing this. You should carry one with you. Make sure you're looking up and seeing some of the areas that aren't as obvious to you about some of the frame members, whether they're cracked, if they're pulled out far and you see nails between them or something like that, where you see some additional framing damage that you might need to address. So again, I would say this is probably not a structural or total loss on the front side on your inspection, but again, that could be changed based upon assessments by structural engineers that may be brought in after you have finished your initial inspection and your initial submission of your estimate. Again, probably the same type of thing. We're not looking at a total loss here. A lot of structural damage to a number of different areas. These types of things, we talked about that earlier. You're going to be dealing with roofing, framing. The tree is probably pulled out pulled down some of the electrical wiring, maybe. It's going to be obviously bringing water into the house if there was any type of rain. It's all the insulation's down. That's going to probably damage all kinds of other materials in the house: flooring, cabinets, personal property, drywall, paint, all kinds of things you're going to have to deal with. But is this a total loss? We don't have a large picture of the entire structure, but from what we see here, if this was the only area, probably not. This is probably not a total loss. You would scope and write all of this. Another good example. This is a large tree that penetrated and cut through the house. You know, I probably wouldn't say on my initial inspection that this would be a total loss. I would write everything I could. I'm going to be looking at walls inside and looking at plumbs, see if it's off plumb. Impacts like this with big trunks of trees that can weigh many, many tons can rack the house and the framing, where, let's say, there's obvious damage here in this end of the house, but maybe down here 25 feet away, the impact itself in cutting through all of this framing racked the entire house. And that may be considered a heavier structural loss to the degree that it could be a total. Again, you probably don't make those assessments on your initial inspection. You write what you can see, no matter how heavy it is. That could be a big estimate. You might have several hundred photos, hundreds of line items. It could be a complicated estimate. Again, I don't want to make it to the degree that it's hard. It's not so hard or difficult. Again, it's just more of it. If you're meticulous, you're going to spend more time, but you're going to still write an estimate and you're still going to scope a property. And by the way, keep in mind, you're going to have a pretty good invoice on these types of losses. So yes, it's a lot of work, but you should make some pretty good money on these. You get paid well for this as an adjuster. So let's keep looking here. I can't see the whole house here. I just pulled this picture in, but this could be a total loss. If the house is not very big and it's just a small, let's say, 1,400 square foot house, maybe it's a single story, it doesn't go that much further down to the left here. Yeah, this looked like these trees, a couple of them may have crushed this side of the house, but potentially rack the entire house and just knock the whole thing off plumb. This might be a total loss here. So let's look at some other things you're going to run into and how to deal with some types of damages on structural losses. And this is very common with brick or brick veneer. So one thing you have to determine is, on brick, is it veneer, which is not load bearing? It is a veneer. It's a set of brick and mortar that's on the outside of framing that's typically not load bearing. If that's the case, now we're not dealing with as much heavy structural loss if we're not dealing with load bearing damage. Now, there could be damage to the veneer and damage to the interior framing, the stud walls and everything, for sure, that is bearing the loads, internal walls. Yeah, you would try to need to determine that if you could. Sometimes you can't. Remember, as adjusters, we can only write what we can see. We are not allowed to do what's called destructive investigation. We can't go taking pieces or parts of the insured's house apart during our inspection to see if we can find any hidden damage. Now, rest assured, if there is hidden damage that you can't see, it's going to get paid for probably. Who's going to find that? The contractor. Once they start doing the actual repairs that we are paying for, they're going to be taking things apart and they're going to find damage, and they're going to bring that up, they're going to photograph it, they're going to send that into the desk adjuster, and the desk adjuster will handle that on an ongoing supplemental basis on the backside through a supplement or potentially re-inspections. Where else might it get discovered? Potentially through demolition, when they're doing the tearing apart to do the initial repairs. Or maybe when a structural engineer comes out and they do a different type of investigation where they are going to find more damage that you could not determine. So just keep in mind that that will be taken care of. The insured is going to get compensated properly, but it's a stage of processes in the claims process. And your stage and your responsibility is the initial inspection to pay for as much as you can possibly pay for that you can document and that is covered under the policy. So this may or may not be structural damage. We don't know yet from this photo. It may be covered, it may not. It looks to me like it would be impact damage that would be pretty fresh, probably from a tree impact or something, not from settling, which is something you have to be aware of on brick. But this would probably be paid for, especially if we zoomed out and a tree fell above this or near this, and we can see that it obviously, the impact cracked this, and then we can go look and see that it's fresh damage. Sure, we would probably pay to replace all this brick. This is a little bit different. Potentially, again, I pulled some of these in and we'll talk about, this could be damage from a covered peril. Usually this would be caused from an impact of a tree. Could be hurricane or heavy wind damage. Obviously, probably EF3 or 4 or above on tornadoes. Probably Cat 3 or above on hurricanes. It takes a lot of wind to break and crack stone and brick and mortar, but it certainly can happen. It can rack houses or blow debris around the neighborhood and impact the house or blow part of the roof off. So it can happen. But what you want to look for is put the pieces together on damage on brick like this or other materials. If it's obvious and they had 150-mile-an-hour winds and you're seeing all kinds of damage on the house, heavy structural damage, you're probably going to pay for all that stuff. It's a no-brainer. You're going to run into other lesser damaged homes where you're going to run into stuff like this, or a tree fell near this, and if it's obvious, okay, fine, pay for it. If it's not, and the tree fell on the other side of the house, but there's no other evidence on this side of the house of any kind of impact damage, but yet the contractor or the insured wants to claim that this was caused by the tree impact, now you may want to question that and do a little deeper investigation to see if you think that's what it is. One of the things you can look at on things like this with drywall and brick and mortar or tuck point, things like the stone, or even siding, if it's broken, is look closely. Get real close, take your flashlight and look inside here in the cracks and look at the interior of the material of the crack and see how fresh it looks. If you have a current date of loss, say that's only a week or two old, and this actually happened from that tree impact a week or two ago, you should be able to see fresh mortar and fresh brick inside. If this was intact, like all this brick here is perfectly intact, and then this cracked suddenly from an impact, where the crack was, you could look inside and see that that material is very fresh inside. It was never impacted before. It's never seen the light of day, but now it is, and you'll know that. You'll be able to tell. If you look in here and see dust bunnies and insect carcasses and cobwebs and weathered material inside, that tells you right away that this has been there for a while. And if your date of loss is a week or two ago, and you can say, no, this has been like this probably for a number of years. So you can attribute that probably not to the cause of loss, so you wouldn't pay for it. So just keep those things in mind. Sometimes you have to put on your Sherlock Holmes hat or your detective hat, and you have to really look a little bit closer. Some losses and most losses are obvious damage. No problem. It's easy. You're going to pay for it. Some stuff is a little bit more obscure, and you're going to have to pay attention a little bit more and think a little bit more and put your detective cap on. Another good example of that, deterioration most likely. Another clue to this is look at the rest of the material that's not damaged. We're losing tuck point and mortar here. It's cracking and breaking. We have some obvious deterioration and water seeping down onto the bricks. Also, look at this. It's already been patched. They've had a mason come out, or somebody has come out and tried to patch the problem before. This is an ongoing problem, most likely not related to a covered peril that we can pay for. Again, most of this is common sense. Put your detective hat on, use your eyes, more importantly, use your brain. Think. Use common sense. Usually the house will tell you what's going on, or the building. May not be the house, it could be a barn on a farm, but the structure will tell you what's going on if you kind of pay attention. Another good example of that, this is a chimney. You'll see a lot of this on chimneys, or maybe you have water penetration in the house. You can't tell where it's getting in on the roof. You go down and yes, it's close or near the chimney. Well, it's pretty obvious. How did it get in? Did it get in the flashing down at the bottom of the chimney? And you look, maybe the flashing is deteriorated, the caulking has come loose or dry rotted. Potentially it rains, it runs down the chimney and inside and behind the flashing, and it gets into the house. Very common. But you'll see this as well. Deteriorated masonry, and the water just getting all inside the chimney here and getting in the house. You can see this is old. It's not been maintained properly. We have moss and lichen growing in the mortar, and a lot of areas the mortar is just completely fallen out. This would not be covered under the policy, obviously. This is not a covered peril. This is lack of maintenance due to and deterioration. Let's continue on. This is another thing you'll see in brick masonry a lot, and you'll see it on stone as well. It's a condition called spalling. Spalling is basically where the stone or the brick becomes brittle. You'll most commonly see this on chimneys and fireplaces outside. And that, or not the fireplace, that's inside, pardon me, but the chimney. And that's because of the continual change in temperature from the fire and the heat. And what it does is it starts flaking off like this. It'll literally just flake off over time and crack on its own through normal weathering and break off, and you'll see all these little pieces all over the roof. And the insured or the contractor will say, oh, hail damaged this. Maybe hail hit the roof and the house, but when it's hitting this spalling condition, it will easily break the stuff off. We might check with your DA or the manager. The carrier may go ahead and pay for this. It is a pre-existing condition that is exacerbated. The damage may be exacerbated by hail hitting it. They may go ahead and allow you to pay for fixing all the masonry on the chimney. Of course, they may want you to depreciate it heavily, but check with your manager on that and see how they want to handle that. They may deny it altogether as a pre-existing condition and say no. But just keep in mind, you'll see this, and it's commonly will be brought up as damage that should be covered under the policy. May or may not. It depends on how the carrier wants to handle it. Now we're getting into some drywall. It's similar with the brick. Drywall can be caused by impacts. We may owe for that. If it's near the impact, it may not be near the impact. It may be fresh drywall cracks. It could be 2 rooms down from the impact. It depends on what the structure is telling you. If it's a giant tree, 2.5, 3 foot diameter trunk, and it just crashed into the house and cut through some of the roof, you can see that impact may have gone and vibrated and penetrated through the framing all the way through the house, and it could have caused damage and racking to drywall, for instance, 2 or 3 rooms down or at the other end of the house. It may not have caused framing damage that far down because framing is much more sturdy. It may not. You don't know that necessarily yet, but it may crack some drywall 2 or 3 rooms down away from, 30 feet away from the impact. Sure. Again, look at the drywall. Look inside of it. Does it look fresh? Does the crack and the break look clean and angular? This looks old, where the paint's had time to break off a little bit and peel. There's some kind of, looks like it could have been patched. So this, it's hard to see. There's some discoloration here. Some stuff over here we don't know yet. You would have to look again. Put your detective hat on. Put all the pieces together. Look at the size of the tree. If it's not a huge tree, yeah, probably not. If this is older drywall inside, you probably wouldn't pay for this. Let's go look at another photo. Probably the same type of thing. This is probably ongoing damage. It looks like it's been patched before in here. You'll see some trowel marks here. It's kind of flaking out a little bit. Again, look at all the telltale signs. See if you can look down inside here. Get a good flashlight. Carry a flashlight with you. Look in there. See if you can see what's going on. Now this is an example of a fresh crack. Let's take a look at it. If we notice, look at the drywall inside. We can see all this nice fresh wood. It hasn't been sitting here a while. Nice fresh drywall material. Nice fresh angular breaks where it hadn't had time for the paint to peel off and little areas to drop off or deteriorate. Nice fresh crack all the way up. We also have some pretty good cracking, or not cracking, but separation here in the door casing. Looks like a door casing in the jamb. Again, put two and two together. Now, this is a pretty severe break because of the distance of the separation of the materials. So it's probably another indication that's probably not, it could be, but probably not a stress fracture or a settling fracture, which is most common with drywall, is settling. The house settles over time, it starts breaking, and the insured or the contractor may want to claim that that was caused by the wind damage or the hail or maybe a tree impact. I mentioned hail there, and yes, you will at times potentially, I know that sounds crazy, but you may run into a situation where they're saying hail damage caused some type of damage like this that makes no sense at all. You don't be surprised of what you run into out in the field the longer you're in this business. But this is pretty clear that this is a pretty fresh break. If it was near an impact tree or something, or there was strong enough winds that could have racked that part of the house, sure, this is probably covered. We're going to cover this. But again, just use common sense, put all the different pieces together of the puzzle, and let that puzzle tell you what's going on. Always, if you have questions and you're not sure, always document, take more pictures than you need, and then you can submit some of those pictures to your manager or claim supervisor or trainers, and they will always be glad to help you. They'll look at this stuff and help you determine what we're going to do, how we're going to write this. They may even need to send this to the desk adjuster and or the carrier, and 2 or 3 different people may need to powwow over this, but they will get back with you and give you direction on how they want you to proceed. You just give them the documentation. Again, more pictures are better than less. You don't have to include every single picture in your claim, but more is better than less. Give them the documentation and let them help you. So, that kind of concludes the video, other than I just want to reiterate, when you're running into your first structural losses, try not to be overwhelmed with it. It's the same thing that we do all the time. It's just more of it. You'll be a little longer out there. You'll be a little longer writing the estimates. But once you do your first couple, 2 or 3 structural losses, it's going to become easier and easier. You'll be less and less intimidated, and you'll be able to, down the road with a little more experience, you'll be able to handle any kind of loss that you run into. So, as always, contact your manager or your support team at Pacesetter. We'll be happy to help you if you have any questions. Hope you have a great day, and we will see you on the next video. Take care.